And if everything is working, we should have the great Cal Schenkel on the line. Cal, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm here.
Excellent. Great. Well, anyway, we're definitely happy to have you here on the Lost and Found. And I'd like to go back into some history in the past, present, and future, as they say.
Yeah.
Tell us about your background. You went to the Philly College of Art?
Yeah, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I went to school outside of Philadelphia, and then I started art school. It was actually a year after I graduated from high school. I wanted to take a year off, and I hitchhiked to California with a friend of mine, which was when I actually first became aware of Zappa. He was just starting. He hadn't released anything yet. It was pre-Freak Out days. And then I came back and to settle down and go to school at Philadelphia College of Art. At that time, it was called. It's now the University of the Arts.
Did you meet Zappa when you were out in California?
I didn't meet him at that time, but I first became aware of him just basically hanging in Hollywood. I saw him occasionally at various clubs, and I don't think at that time I had heard them play. They were performing, I believe, in the area, but I'm not sure because after I started school, I left fairly soon to go back to California with a friend of mine, and we settled in L.A. for a little while, and at that time, I did see them perform. That would have been in 65, late 65 and early 66. I spent that winter out in California. And they were playing at the Whiskey and at the Trip, I believe. Again, it's still before Freak Out came out. So I was familiar with what they were doing, but I still hadn't met Frank yet.
Now, one of the things when you said you saw him hanging out in the clubs, was just the regular club scene, or watching bands, and if there were any famous bands which you remember seeing Zappa at?
You know, it's hard to say because this was in Hollywood.
Okay.
So there was, there were so many clubs, and there were obviously just about any band there was who would have been playing in one of them at one point.
Okay, sure.
I wasn't too involved in the club scene because I didn't really have any money,
Okay.
I was basically just a kid hanging out there. So, but one thing that I did a lot of was go to Canner's after hours, which was the place where everybody showed up. It became a huge scene in around 65, 66. And there were other clubs, too, that like Pandora's Box. I think if you... Frank put out a freak map in... I think it was something you could send for in the original Freak Out. I don't know if it was in any of the later reprints. But in this freak map, he outlines all of the clubs, and there's a little history of Hollywood at that time, which was kind of a very interesting place for a while until they started to crack down and close a lot of these places. But that's the scene that I kind of discovered at that time when I went out there. So that was my introduction to Frank. And then there were a couple of very kind of funny coincidences. One time I was hitchhiking late at night to go home, and I got picked up by this car full of girls, and they said, "Hey, we're going to a session. You want to go along?" And I really didn't know what they were talking about, but I said, "Hey, why not?"
Sure.
And I wound up at one of the Freak Out sessions where Frank had put out a call to just bring in all these, crazy people off the street to make noise for, I think it was Son of Monster Magnet or Help I'm Rock, one of them, So that was kind of a funny coincidence. But I actually didn't really meet Frank until a year later when I was back at school again.
Mm-hmm.
Came back to Philly and started school again. And then at the time, my girlfriend was Ezra Mohawk, Sandy Hurwitz at the time, and we heard that Frank was going to be performing in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And well, in the meantime, she was a singer. In the meantime, I had introduced her to Freak Out. Freak Out came out, and I played it for her, and she really dug it. So we wanted to go up and see Frank when they were performing. This was probably in the winter of '67. Mm-hmm. No, '66. Winter of '66. Maybe early '67. And I couldn't go. I had classes, so she went up with some friends and wound up going up on stage with them and singing, which was something that he would often bring people up on stage.
Was that at the Garrick Theater?
No, this was before the Garrick. I think it was at the Balloon Farm. This was before they were playing there. It was just a one night or a weekend gig. And then as a result, she wound up performing with them again for a while. And then when they did play the Garrick, she joined the band. So at that time, that's when I actually met Frank. And it was right around when Absolutely Free came out. And he immediately put me to work doing some ads for Absolutely Free. I was still living in Philly, but kind of commuting to New York to do some work for him. And then he offered me a job, so I quit school and moved to New York and started working for him. Started working on We're Only For the Money cover.
Now, what was I going to say? You designed the all the plaster characters and whatnot on We're Only In It For the Money?
That was probably the first big job I did, was to start working on that album. And I did the plastic character. Well, obviously the concept was established from Sgt. Pepper, so
sure.
It was a matter of kind of facilitating a satire of that. And one of the things was to do the wax figures. So I went out and bought a bunch of mannequins and started to deform them and turn them into the mothers. And then we had a big photo session at Jerry Chatsberg, who was a fashion photographer. And then I did the collage in the background of all the characters, mostly of which are pretty obscure, pulled from your books and such.
What was the sort of the thought behind sort of the choosing the characters that made it into the photo shoot? I remember the Beatles had their sort of, I forget their reasons for choosing the people they did in the Sgt. Pepper covers, but was there a something along those lines for the cover of We're Only In It For the Money?
Well, originally there was, and when we first started the project, Frank took out a tissue and just laid it over Sgt. Pepper and then started writing in names of people he wanted in the thing, and then when it became too difficult to actually get people to, find them and get them to this photo shoot, Jimi Hendrix was there because he had been hanging out with Frank at the time. And when it just became too difficult to find some of these people, there was a time factor there. So at that point, it became a matter of just making it look good.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that was kind of funny was Frank just gave me his yearbook and said, "Here, just take a bunch of people out of this," So I pulled people out of that, and from my end, I tried to kind of match the feel of who was in Sgt. Pepper, to replace kind of a look for that person more than actually who it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it was more visual from my end.
Sure.
And I threw in a couple of friends, that kind of got a kick out of being in the thing.
Being in the cover. Now, when you said that you looked for, there were some people that you looked for and you had a hard time finding. Were those famous people at the time, or just random people?
I would imagine some of them. Without going back and really looking at it, it'd be hard for me to remember who, but I can't really remember anybody other than I remember that he wanted Paul Winchell and Jerry Mahoney there because it was like a puppet or something. Beatles. That was the one thing I kind of remember.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember about working with Jimmy?
The one thing I remember is he was just a really sweet guy, real nice guy,
Mm-hmm.
I met him at the shoot, and of course, like I said, he was at Frank's now and then too. He was hanging out with Frank for a while. It was a pretty brief period, and we went to see them perform one night in a small club, so it must have been before they really made it huge,
Mm-hmm.
But later that year, I went to London on the first Mother's first European tour, and he was at the Albert Hall performance, and I met him backstage again, and I handed him a pound note because I wanted him to sign it,
You handed him what? I'm sorry?
A 1 pound note,
Okay, yep.
currency.
Sure.
And I said, hey, remember met you in New York at the photo shoot? And he said, oh, no, that's all right, man. You don't have to pay me back. He thought that I had borrowed the money from him or something. But, I just wanted him to sign this note. But, he was just a sweet guy, very nice, very humble, and, as a person, I think.
That's great. Now, I know it's been said that Frank tried to get permission from Paul McCartney to parody the cover. Did you ever meet any of the Beatles? And
well, I met Ringo when we were filming 200 Motels.
Okay.
Other than that, no, I didn't.
Do you know what they thought of your work with the cover?
Pardon me?
Do you know what they thought of the Only in It for the Money cover?
Well, I heard that they liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I read that somewhere that they actually thought it was funny and enjoyed the parody.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the legal implications of it all, it's very kind of murky because I didn't really know a lot of what was going on. I remember when we got memos from MGM that we had to turn it inside out and put bars on people's faces just for basic legal issues. But I think, from my understanding, a lot of that was just simply MGM legal department didn't want to have to deal with it,
Sure.
So I don't know exactly what went on between the Beatles and MGM and Frank, and I'm just not privy to that.
Okay, fair enough. What was the next cover you did? Was that Reuben and the Jets?
Actually, after that, I worked on Lumpy Gravy, which Frank had actually already had the cover done earlier before I met him, and did that in L.A. before they went to New York, the photo. So I put that cover together and did the piece of art on the inside. And then I started working on basically what was going to be No Commercial Potential, I believe, which eventually became Uncle Meat, most of it. Things are always changing. I mean, I'd start to work on a project, and then it would just morph into something else.
Mm-hmm.
But I started working on that in New York, and then Frank had gone to L.A. to be in the Monkees movie and TV show, or had to do some stuff with them, and he decided that it was time to go back to L.A., and I was pretty happy about that. It was in the middle of winter, so about the next few months we were just basically moving. And then when I got to L.A., we all moved into the log cabin. You might have heard stories about the log cabin.
The little house I used to live in?
No. The little house I used to live in was...
I thought that was the Laurel Canyon abode.
It was his earlier house that he lived in that before he went to New York.
Okay.
So he was living in Laurel Canyon. I guess he was anxious to get back to home. But no, we moved into this place. It was called the Log Cabin. It was on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. It was originally built by Tom Mix in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
in the form of a log cabin, basically. Although it wasn't actually a log cabin, it just was covered with logs inside and out. It was kind of a very interesting place. And I moved into what we called the tree house. It was a wing of the place that was a separate apartment built up the side of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Turned that into my studio. And that's where I started working on Cruising with Reuben and the Jets.
Now,
where I did that piece. So,
what was I going to say? When you were living in the house in Laurel Canyon, were you there when John Mayall was crashing with Frank? And
yeah, there was always somebody coming by. Well, I think Mayall at the time was living in Laurel Canyon too, or he did move to Laurel Canyon shortly after. So yeah, he was around a lot. There was always somebody showing up. One night, Mick Jagger came over with Marianne Faithfull, and Captain Beefheart was there, and the Mothers and Beefheart and Jagger were just jamming in the basement. That was a fun evening.
Wow, that's pretty great.
I don't remember much about it musically, but it was fun. It was a fun time.
What was I going to say? Who was the? What was the concept behind the sort of people with large noses and the sort of animal figures on Reuben and the Jets? I always wondered about that.
Well, one of the early things that I did was some ads for Frank was Alan Douglas, who was like a deaf. He probably did a lot of other things I don't know about, but he had the rights to some albums, mostly jazz albums, and he came to Frank to put together the packaging and like kind of a concept for this company that was going to be releasing these albums. And Frank came up with this idea called Moop. And I did some covers for some of these albums. One of them was for an Eric Dolphy album. And that cover became Burnt Weenie Sandwich later on, because this deal kind of fell through when I think Alan Douglas just thought that the whole thing was just a little too weird, what he was doing with this stuff. So, but during the period of working for this, I did some ads for this company that were placed in Hit Parader and some other kind of strange publications, music publications at the time. And these ads were basically these little kind of like strange cartoons, cartoon panels and stories that didn't really make much sense, kind of surreal little things. But in the context of that, I was doing these dog face guys, basically, based on Disney comics, Carl Barks stuff and whatever. And so Frank liked that concept, and he decided to, the story is based on, somewhere the story is written down about Uncle Meat and Reuben and the Jets, and I don't know what album it's in, but there somewhere. So it's just an illustration of that strange story.
Okay. Fair enough. Now, what was I going to say? The cover of Uncle Meat I always found fascinating. And whose teeth are those on the cover? And where was that from? An X-ray that some dentist threw out, or?
Yeah. Well, here's the story of Uncle Meat. Now, we lived in the log cabin for about 3 months. It was basically just a summer, and then Frank bought a place up on top of the hill at Laurel Canyon, which became his home for the rest of his life. But at the time, when we left the log cabin, I had to I moved into a little place up in Eagle Rock, and we had to find a studio. So I rented this place on Melrose, and previously it was a dentist's office, and it was an old guy. He retired, so there was a lot of junk left, that behind, and these old dental books. And so in the meantime, the Mothers, Frank, were in London again, in Europe on tour, and of course at the time it wasn't so easy to communicate, and they needed a cover for the new album. He wanted to see something right away. So we weren't really, talking about concepts because they were busy, and so this just came to me. Here's something I can play with. So I just, put together a collage, and that's what turned out.
Okay.
So that's really where it came from. I mean, it was simply a matter of lucky choice in studio space.
Fascinating. Now, another thing I always wondered about, you worked on the Chunga's Revenge. The photo on the cover of Frank is sort of in a grimacing, with the grimacing.
He's yawning.
Oh, he's yawning.
Yawn. Yeah.
Okay. Was that because I always wondered if he was yawning, he was yelling at his band, what was going on there? And so
no, he was yawning, and it's just a photo that he liked that someone took and said, "Here, use this for the cover." I don't remember. I guess I could look at the credits to see who it was, but it wasn't someone that we were usually working with too often. But Phil Franks, yeah, that's who it was.
The guy that took the picture. What about the vacuum cleaners? The vacuum cleaner with
the story, which basically is entirely that little clip on the cover, is based on an event that happened earlier when Frank was recording in Cucamonga, I think. Mm-hmm. And now I'm not sure who came up with the concept, but I think it was Roy. And there was some sort of machine there that was involved with cutting the vinyl, I guess, on the demo discs, acetates. And they I guess in between when they're sitting around waiting to do their thing, recording, they were always joking about something and, mm-hmm. Making up stories and having fun. So that's where that came from.
So some random story about that.
Yeah.
The sexually aroused vacuum cleaner. And
yeah, that's where it came from.
Okay. Now, do you know how about the Hot Rats album? I know that Matt Groening used that as a template for his Life in Hell cartoon. Are you familiar with that cartoon?
Oh yeah. I didn't know that's what was his influence for that, huh?
Yep, it was the rabbit coming out of the ground was from the cover of Hot Rats. Mm-hmm. I understand that you met Matt Groening when he was a student in 1976.
Well, actually, I never met him, but he put together an art exhibit of my work and Captain Beefheart's work, Don Vliet's work, mm-hmm. and paintings, and at Evergreen College. But I didn't meet him. I never actually met him physically. We spoke on the phone several times, but he was in. I didn't get up to that show. I just sent the work up.
Okay, so he was the guy that sort of presented it and sort of spearheaded it and put it all together.
Yeah, he and I think it was Linda Barry. Also, they were in school together. I'm pretty sure that's who it was. They put together this show and. Just asked me if I could, send some of my work up, and Don also had work in it.
Now, so you met him. You met him later on.
Well, no, we spoke. I actually never met him. I never saw him in person.
Interesting.
I left L.A. right around the time that he was getting started in L.A. too, which is kind of unfortunate because it might have led to greater things too. Mm-hmm. Because I know he and Gary Panter became good buddies, and Gary, when he came to L.A., he came to see me, and we got to be friends for a little while. But then I left L.A. shortly after that.
Okay.
Come back east again, and then totally different scene.
Now, what was I going to say? The car on the cover of Just Another Band from L.A.
Yeah.
Was that based off the Cruising for Burgers, or?
That I at the time had a '39 Pontiac. In fact, I drove across country in that car when we moved to California from New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so, kind of that's really where I got the visual on that. But of course, at the time, those cars were pretty big in LA, in the cruising scene. 30s, and with the big bug eye lights and all.
Okay, but why the burger? Sort of the Cruising for Burgers aspect.
Yeah, I guess I don't remember. Sometimes a concept will just come up so simply that it's like, who knows where it came from.
Which leads, I guess, leads to the next question. How much direction did Frank give you, and how much were you sort of free to do on your own?
It really varied. I mean, it varied from none to like total,
Mm-hmm.
and mostly somewhere in between. But like none, Uncle Meat and a burnt weenie sandwich, those were pieces of art that I just simply did, showed them to Frank, and he really liked what I did, and that was it,
Mm-hmm.
To cover like the Grand Wazoo or One Size Fits All, which were essentially based on either lyrics or a story that he wrote,
Mm-hmm.
to go with the album. And then I would start off by just simply, taking elements from that and then showing him some preliminary drawings, and then we would bat around different ideas. He'd add something, I'd add something, So that those were much more collaborative.
Okay.
But based on originally on a concept that was Frank's. So
was there things? A friend of mine wanted to ask: were there things that he was totally happy with, and were there things that he wasn't so happy with that sort of you recall?
No, I don't really remember there being anything that he wasn't happy with that I did, because if it was if I was doing, I would be working generally, aside from a job like a cover like Uncle Meat, where I just did something and it was done.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, if we were working together on something, a concept, then I would be seeing him all along the way and showing him what I'm doing in a pencil stage, and then changing things. So
sure,
there wasn't really an issue of liking or not. It would just be
a work in progress.
Accommodating changes, yeah.
Okay. Now, speaking of the Grand Wazoo, is it true the song "Calvin and His Two Hitchhikers" is about an incident that happened with you? Yeah,
that's a story about an interesting event. I was at Frank's for some reason, and for some reason I was there without a car. I don't remember, maybe my car was in the shop or something, but I had to go. This was when he lived at the top of the hill. I'd go down to my studio, and so I borrowed, at the time it was Janet's car. It was this Mark 9 or whatever Jaguar, this kind of real classy-looking white Jaguar that originally belonged to Captain Beefheart, and Frank bought it from him and gave it to Janet, who was, Janet of Janet and Lucy from 200 Motels.
Mm-hmm.
She was Moon's governess at the time, living in the guest house there. And so I got in this car. I was with Gail's sister, Sherry. Went down to drive down to my studio down in Hollywood. And I get to the corner of Mulholland and Woodrow Wilson, which is right at the top of Laurel Canyon, where it goes over into the valley. And there's a light there, and I'm stopped at the light, and I see this couple, this long-haired guy and girl, and just standing on the corner hitchhiking. And the next thing I know, they're getting in the back of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't say anything or, nod to them to get in or anything, but I figured they thought I did, so I thought, okay, well, I'll just give them a ride. Going down the hill, why not?
Sure.
So I asked them, well, where are you going? And they didn't say anything. They just stood, just sat there kind of in a daze. And so, okay, well, I drove down and got down to the bottom of the hill and said, this is where I'm going. I'm at my studio, and again, they didn't say anything. They were just totally oblivious, just sitting in the back of the car. And so I got out of the car, parked the car, got out, and went up to my studio. And every once in a while, I'd look out the window, and they're still sitting in the back of the car. And then I looked once, and they were gone. I said, well, finally, And then I looked again a little while later, and they had come back. They went to the store and picked up a loaf of bread and some lunch meat, and were making sandwiches, and were back in the car eating their lunch. And but eventually they left, and that was the end of it. So Frank wrote a song about it.
It wasn't a particularly inclement, afternoon.
It was just a normal day.
Yep.
Normal sunny California day.
It's not like they were trying to get out of the rain to make their ham sandwich.
No, no, it was just some strange, weird event.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's very banal, but it's just so strange.
Yeah, it's completely fantastic. Now, many of us know your work that you did with Zappa, but you also did covers for Tom Waits, Tim Buckley, and others. Which were some of your favorites?
Well, most of the other covers that I did were design and art direction and some photography direction, like the Tom Waits stuff. I worked with. I think for the most part with Ed Cariff, and I did a number of other jobs with him for various bands. At one time I did some work for Three Dog Night, which eventually was never used because it didn't fit in with the concept by the time they were done with the album, but I might have a credit on one of their albums because we were out in the desert shooting some stuff too. But one of them, we built this huge set, and everything was orange, or it was going to be called Wizards of Orange or something, but then they changed the concept, so that wasn't used. But as far as my favorites, I don't know. I really like the Tom Waits covers. The first one was shot at my house, and actually that's my piano it's sitting at. The one with just a clock in the background.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the favorite of all would have to be Trout Mask, which we also shot in that dentist's office. That was a really interesting winter there.
Now, I was told that, speaking of Trout Mask, that it was you that went to the fish market and purchased the carp.
Yeah. Went to the Fairfax fish market and found an appropriate sized fish and bought the head right there, and then took it home and hollowed it out and shot the photo
and
got rid of it as quickly as we could afterwards.
So what was that like working with Beefheart? I was told it was a long session, and he kept it on. He kept it on for a long period of time, or. It's hard to remember how long it was, but it probably would have seemed long because of the smell.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't refrigerated. So I imagine it didn't take long before it started to smell pretty bad. But yeah, Don was great. I mean, we got along great. I used to go out to his place in the desert, his little place out in the desert, and paint all night. We'd both, we just paint and talk.
I was told on the cover of when you were doing the shoot for Trout Mask that Beefheart attempted to play saxophone through the.
Yeah, I have
and you
really
have footage of this?
Clip of that, an 8mm. They used it in the BBC did a documentary about him a number of years ago, which is probably fairly available.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it lately, but they used it in there. I think it's been used in a couple. It's very short. It's only a couple seconds long because it was just shot. I was messing around with 8mm at the time, and just happened to think, well, I'll take a little clip of this, and that was it.
I was going to say I didn't know it was the footage was out there. I was going to ask you if you had any plans on releasing it. Yeah.
If you track down that BBC documentary,
okay,
you should be able to find it. I'm sure somewhere. It might even be online. I don't know.
Cal, of all the covers you did for Frank, which would you say were your favorites?
Well,
if you had to choose, yep.
I guess Reuben and the Jets is probably the favorite, just because it's the most fun. I'm not totally happy with the final version. I'm always doing new versions of it for people, for fans. So, and usually just a quick, sketchy version, But yeah, that's probably my favorite.
Reuben, now you use kind of a similar motif on the Ahead of Their Time.
Yeah.
How did that
started out to be a piece that I was really going to get into and do like an old master's painting, version of it. But there were some communications problems at the time, and I got really into doing this thing, and most of my communication was through Gail on that project, and I got it. I kind of misunderstood. I thought it was supposed to be a Zappa album, but it was supposed to be a Mother's album. So originally, there was a painting that I did of Frank as the main subject, and then just about at the end of the project, when there wasn't much time left, I discovered that it was supposed to be a Mother's album, so I had to totally redo the whole thing. And I didn't really get the opportunity to polish it to the level that I wanted to. So, but that was a fun project. It's a similar idea, using that type of character.
So Frank just called you up and said, "Cal, I need your services again," or?
Yeah,
You stayed in touch all those years?
I was living in Pennsylvania back then. I mean, I was back in Pennsylvania, so Frank had me do a project now and then, but, it was kind of in between other stuff, so.
Okay.
There was a long period when I really wasn't doing too much for him. I think between, I went back to L.A. for a while in 1980, and when I left L.A., it was during this period when Frank broke up with Herb, his manager, for many years, and was also involved in the lawsuit with Warner Brothers, and so there wasn't really anything being done for about a year. There were no projects in the works. The last thing I did was put together Zoo de Lures, and then Warner's had Gary Panter do those couple of covers that were, without Frank's knowledge. Well, I don't know if they were out of his knowledge, but it was during the period when they were having the lawsuit, so it was something that they did, without his permission, essentially.
Studio Tan and Sleep Dirt?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That was after I left L.A., so. But one of the reasons I left was it was hard to find work and there wasn't anything going on, so I decided it's time to go back east. So the next thing really that was done that was, in my opinion, interesting visually was when John Williams did Joe's Garage. John Williams was kind of a co-art person that I was working with when Frank and Herb had these two separate labels, Bizarre and Straight, and were, releasing other acts, and John Williams pretty much concentrated on the Straight projects, did the Alice Cooper cover. I started working on that one, but then he took over.
Well, was that Prettiest for You?
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, that was, again, the art, I think, came from Alice. It was a piece of art that he had wanted to use. But then, so I was back in L.A. in 1980, and I happened to drive by the house, and I noticed that it looked totally different. I got to go in and see what's going on, and because I hadn't even talked to Frank in about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I walked up. I went up to the door and went up, and Frank wasn't there at the time, but Gail let me in, and we talked for a while. And then Frank came home and said, "Well, I got a job for you if you want." And so I put together a poster for. They were going to Europe, and he wanted to do a tour book. So I put together this little tour book for Europe, and one of the pieces in the book was this collage that I did of like kind of a clubs. And Frank said, "Let's use that for this cover." And I said, "Well, I can do a much better version for a cover." So that's when I did Tinseltown Rebellion.
Okay.
And then I came back east again. And so, at that time, there really wasn't much going on until, again, he asked me to do some work for him, which was a while later, I guess, when I started working on the Old Masters.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to remember what was in between that and the next thing I did. Maybe you know.
Okay.
I guess. Well, see, there were other projects that were changed that Frank had originally released one way, and then one of them, for instance, was that I had done originally for a Japanese version of. I can't think of the title now.
Like Zoodalores or...
No, this was after Best Band You Never Heard in Your Life.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, that was originally released with a photo, I think, or some other not very interesting graphic. And the company that was releasing that in Japan asked me to do a cover for it, so I did that artwork, and then for them, and then Frank saw it, and he said, "Let's, use this on the American version." So, but in the meantime, I don't think it actually was used on the American version until Ryko re-released it after his death. So.
Yes, yep. Yeah, I remember the initial, the one had a photo of, maybe a live photo of the band playing. And
yeah, so probably the next thing I did after Tinseltown for him directly would have been
Best Band?
Playground Psychotic.
Okay, yep.
Which was essentially the art from an old ad that I did earlier for a concert, kind of reconfigured, and then ahead of their time.
Okay.
That was pretty much it, I guess.
In the what do you think that album art is becoming a dying breed in the age of iPods and iTunes and people not buying CDs and listening to stuff?
I guess so. I mean, I don't. There's not. I don't really know. I haven't been that involved in it at all. I mean, I've done a few CD packages here and there, mostly for just smaller acts, that aren't on major labels or anything. So I don't know really what's going on with that market myself at all. You probably know more than I do about it.
No, I would just say that it just kind of seems that way when obviously it's one thing to go from the vinyl, a big cover vinyl album to to a smaller CD sleeve, and now when people don't even buy CDs are becoming a smaller and smaller market, and you just have a little tiny thumbnail on somebody's iPod. It just seems like it's becoming a lost art.
I guess it is. I mean, there's this, I don't know where it's going to go myself, but I would think that there would be some way to incorporate visual material. Of course, there's video,
Sure,
which is easily compatible with the audio now. It's all the same thing, I guess, in terms of the functionality of the file. But beyond that, I mean, one thing I'm doing is selling my art directly to people, on my website. So I would think there would be a way to sell art that you could actually have a physical thing in context with the audio some way too, because people like to have the visual thing.
Sure.
You can hang it and put it on your wall too, But that's maybe something to think about for the musicians to release something and have maybe an available something you can buy in conjunction with it.
Sure. Do you think that sort of an album cover can color someone's perception of a particular album? I know I definitely feel that way. Listening.
I would think so, yeah. Especially when it was a huge piece of art on a vinyl album, because it's right there. I mean, when you're listening to it, you open it up and you got the image right there with you while you're listening to it. So, yeah, I think it was a much more integral part of the experience. At one time.
Sure. Now, I understand you've held exhibits of your work in the Pennsylvania area. Yeah,
I've lately been exhibiting. For a while, I wasn't doing too much because I've been doing most of the work that I do online and connecting with people directly. But I'm starting to do some shows again. Part of the problem is that as soon as I do some art, I usually sell it right away. So I don't have much of a backlog to show.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm working in that direction again. I really would like to do a tour and have a little show here and there.
I was going to say, was there any thoughts of taking your exhibit on the road? Yeah,
it's something I'd like to do. It's going to take a lot of work to put something like that together, and right now I'm in the process of moving, getting ready to move. The place I'm in is like the house that I grew up in, so it's so full of stuff. It's a huge project just to get to the point where I can just get out of it.
Sure, I hear you. Yep.
But once that's done, then I really want to start doing some traveling.
That's great. Anyway, Cal, it's been definitely a pleasure talking to you. If people want to
thanks.
People want to go to your website and purchase your art, and what's the website people can go to for further info?
It's real simple. It's Ralph.com, but with an F, RALF, as in Frank.
Okay, excellent.
.com. Yeah, I'm always doing new stuff. Got some things there now, but I'll be working on some new projects and getting them up pretty soon. Actually, this week I'm in the process of changing servers. So if you go there and you have trouble getting there at any point, it shouldn't be a long transition. But that'll probably be sometime in the middle of the week.
Excellent. Well, I definitely hope you get that problem solved.
Yeah.
Anyway, Cal, it's been definitely a grand pleasure talking to you, and I hope to see you at either in an art exhibit in Pennsylvania or maybe back in Baltimore.
Yeah, or maybe in Boston.
Excellent.
Or Cambridge, or that's where you are, right?
Yeah, we're in Cambridge. Yep.
Well, we'll have to talk about that. Maybe there's a place there we could show some stuff.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay, cool.
All right, Cal. Thanks for talking to you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great, thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.